Sri Sri Radha-Londonishvara and our very special guest tonight is His Grace Ranchor Prabhu, who designed this beautiful temple. His Grace Ranchor Prabhu, and he's going to read from his book about Prabhupada and the early days. So please, hear and listen attentively.
I came back to London, and shortly after returning, Prabhupada visited in the summer of '76, so I spent a short while at the manor while he was there. I was sent to Dublin. We had had some preaching going on in Dublin. Prabhu Vishnu, now Swami, had taken a travelling party of distributing devotees to distribute there, living in a van. And they'd rented a small house on the bay. Narahari was there, a few devotees that you will know were there, knocking on people's doors, giving them the shock of their lives in around Dublin. But then they'd come back, and so the general feeling was we need to have a centre in Dublin. So I was sent there alone initially. And when I got there, somehow I got the name and I got the address of a follower of Ananda Marg. Ananda Marg were a pretty extreme sect led by, I think, a Sikh guru, and the followers were mostly Westerners. And this guy's name was Yudhisthira, and he had a flat in the Docklands of Dublin, which was an extremely rough area. I remember I had an old beat-up car, and I remember one morning I came down to drive into town, and all four tyres had been punctured, and all the windows had been smashed, and the gear lever had been broken off. That was because, you know, I was wearing a dhoti, and so I was obviously an alien. So me and Yudhisthira, we had that much in common. We were both aliens in a foreign land. So I was there trying to look for a place to rent for a temple, and I was there on my own for a few weeks. And what kept me going, I found it actually hugely exciting, because I was remembering how, I thought, what a privilege, because Prabhupada went all on his own to America, and nobody had heard of Krishna. So it was an opportunity for me to just have a little taste. I mean, I lasted a few weeks. I couldn't, no way could I have done that alone. And then I was joined by Rasamanda and one or two other, Ilapati, who's now Bhakti Vikash Swami, and we got things moving. So we can't really measure ourselves against Prabhupada, but he gave us an inspiration to follow. He had a vision so stupendous, a vision to change the world. Now normally I would say beware of people who want to change the world, fired up with a vision. It can be a very dangerous thing. Unless that vision is matched with a quality of love and attention, the ability to focus completely, as was so beautifully described yesterday morning by Gurudas Prabhu. You described how Prabhupada had that natural sort of ability that he could focus completely on the person who was with him. And I also was very fortunate to have experiences of that early on when I was beckoned into Prabhupada's room, actually by Shamsundar. I was very fortunate that when I joined the temple a year earlier, I was just in time to meet you, Shamsundar, and Malati, and Gurudas and Yamuna before you all left for India. A friend of mine, Mike, we were sharing a flat in Chelsea, and he was a trainee stockbroker, a trainee rascal, and I was an artist. And we decided, we'd heard about the Hare Krishna devotees, because we'd heard the song, and I'd seen Prabhupada on television, so there was this amazing aura around. Nobody knew really what they were, but I knew, this was something that I really wanted to get close to. So before we'd even got up to London, we planned, okay, we're going to rent a flat, preferably in Chelsea, which in those days, you could do. And I was going to go to college. I was at Chelsea Art College, and he was going to go and work in the city, and we were going to visit the Radha Krishna temple several times a week. That was our plan, and we were going to just sort of hang out with these Radha Krishna temple people. So we came on Sunday, late in the afternoon, and the Sunday feast, the Sunday program was in progress. And the doors of the temple, once you're inside the lobby, the door of the temple had a little window, oval window, which Shamsundar had very thoughtfully provided, and which later on, when I built this temple, I made sure to provide windows into the temple, because he was probably thinking of people like me. To open a door and you don't know what's behind it, but there's something pretty heavy there, and you don't know what's going on. It's nice to be able to just peep in, and think about it. At least know what you're going in for. That kind of middle ground is important for most people, and of course it's something Prabhupada understood very well, which he provided for us in the, not so much for me, but for the early devotees. He provided that middle ground, and is part of introducing people to Krishna. So I peeped through the window, and I saw that something the people in there were, I can't remember if they were chanting or sitting and hearing, but I could see that they were very engrossed, and I felt, no, I don't want to step into that. There's something going on there, and maybe I might not feel comfortable with it. So Mike said, no, that's okay, because they're going to serve the feast soon. And it'll be downstairs, so let's go downstairs to the prasadam room. So we went down to the prasadam room, and there was Yamuna sitting on the other side of the room, and she had some pots of prasadam, and she was just about to start making up the plates, paper plates, because the system was that you made up the plates and then you brought the plates to the guests. So when she saw, Mike had been to the temple before, this was my first time, when she saw Mike, she said, oh, hello, Mike. And in true Prabhupada, trained by Sri Prabhupada, she immediately said, come and help. So me and Mike very happily sat down and we helped to make up. I was putting I had the job to put a pakora on each plate, and then he was putting a samosa on each plate, and Yamuna was a fabulous cook, and she worked incredibly hard. She never got enough sleep. So we were very happy to help her, and then when we finished serving out 30 or 40 plates for everyone upstairs, then she said, no, sit down and eat. So I was sitting there with Mike and tasting with great sort of reverence a pakora, having been brought up as a Roman Catholic, to believe that the bread is the body of Christ. I was thinking, gosh, it's a whole plate of, holy food. I understood it totally. So with great reverence, I was just taking a little piece, and just at that moment, Shamsundar put his head around the door, and he came in. And Mike had told me about Shamsundar. He said, there's this really friendly guy, he's a carpenter, you'll love him. Because I was an artist. And so we chatted. You won't remember that, but I was so pleased to chat with you. And then within, of course, all our plans were completely torpedoed, because I decided more or less on the spot I have to live here. And, so I abandoned Mike and the flat in Chelsea and moved into the temple. The principal at Chelsea Art College, when he heard I'd just been admitted to the degree course, and he called to see me. He called me to his office. I'd never been up to the top floor. And I went in to see him, and he said, why are you doing this? Why are you throwing away such an opportunity? Don't you realise how rare it is to get a place in Chelsea Art College, and you're just abandoning it? I just said, I'm sorry, I have to do this. There's nothing I could say to justify my actions. A couple of weeks later, I managed to arrange a program at Chelsea Art College. We booked the theatre and went there to chant. One student came. When I saw that, I thought, I used to think artists were the only people worth hanging out with, but when I saw only one of them came, I thought, these people haven't a clue. And so our plans were torpedoed. I moved into the temple, and then I was so fortunate, because then a year later, when Prabhupada came, and Shamsundar by then was his personal secretary, and I was probably one of the few, there was just one or two of us that were the same, that had been there the year before. And I don't know quite how Shamsundar knew, but he knew that I'd had some sort of architectural background. And Prabhupada wanted an architect. And so I was called into Prabhupada's room. And I then you know, having been and still being in complete awe of Srila Prabhupada, which is an extraordinary, I suppose it's hard to understand. It's still hard for me to understand in a way that I heard even Shamsundar, you were saying, you know, the first time they came into Prabhupada's presence, you were kind of scared. Something, right? That it's quite extraordinary that someone who you love so much and who you think of all the time, who dominates pretty much, you know, all of your life, and yet you're actually frightened of them. And you know you don't need to be, but you are. And I think it's just something to do with, you know, true greatness. If you're in the presence of true greatness, there is something overwhelming and awesome about that. So I was quite fearful, and when I was brought into Prabhupada's presence, one thing I remember was that there was a devotee called Narayan, who I was working with, who was a how would you say, very rumbustious character from America, extremely strong ego. You never know, he never knew, he could go either way. You know, one day he'd be in a really good mood and the next day it'd be really terrifying. Anyway, I came in with him and he already knew Prabhupada pretty well, so Shamsundar was there too. And he introduced me that, but then Narayan said, "Oh, Prabhupada, he's tired, because I've been working very long hours on these designs." And he said, "No, he's tired," and Prabhupada said, he quoted, is it that Sanskrit phrase, Atmanam Manyate Jagat? Whatever is in your mind, you think is in somebody else's mind. He said, "That means you are tired." And I immediately thought, oh, he's on my side. And he said to me, he turned to me and he said, "Are you tired?" I said, "No, Prabhupada, I'm not tired." So I felt obviously hugely privileged that for the next few weeks I was in and out of Prabhupada's room to discuss designs for the Mayapur buildings. And when Prabhupada would go on morning walks, I was given the opportunity to go with him in case he suddenly came up with an instruction, which he regularly did, about what he wanted to be built in Mayapur. But then the most special time was, this was in somewhere in 1971. Prabhupada was due to leave from England to go to Nairobi. Where the preparations were being made for a big event. And he was also going to recuperate. He'd not been well, he was going to recuperate in Mombasa. That was the plan. So when he was a few days before he left, Prabhupada had a sort of an inner core of devotees who would travel with him. They weren't always the same people, but one of them was almost always Pradyumna, the Sanskrit editor. Shamsundar at that time was always one of them, and his servant, and there were a few. And of course there was Narayan, who wasn't travelling with Prabhupada, but he was at that time in London with Prabhupada. So they kind of, some of them, I'm not sure if Shamsundar did, but the rest, they went ahead to Nairobi. And the temple, which had been very full, you know, very place, tiny building, about a third the size of this building, or maybe a quarter the size of this building, was, during Prabhupada's visit, was housing about 100 people from all over Europe. And there was competition over, you know, who had the landing, which landing I could sleep on. You know, that's how people were sleeping all the way up the stairs, and so on. And to make matters even more difficult, there were two showers, 2 bathrooms in the building, one for the men, one for the women. But Prabhupada, when he was there, he had the women's bathroom as his. So they had to go down, the road to the YMCA to have a shower. So the place was just bursting at the seams. But just in those last few days, Prabhupada had been over a month with us. The temple kind of emptied out. And the main sort of men, they went to Nairobi. And so there was just a few of us, maybe just a dozen of us, I think. And Prabhupada. And a message reached Prabhupada from his disciple Vaikuntanath, who was married to Saradia, and they were in Trinidad. And they had received a donation or an offer of land for a temple. So Prabhupada immediately decided, yes, we'll accept the offer, we'll build a temple. I mean, there was no money, and so he called for me. And that was wonderful, because it was just Prabhupada and me in, several sessions that I spent with Prabhupada, and he explained to me how he wanted it designed. And I went away and made drawings, and then he said, come back, tomorrow and show me, and then I did. And so back and forth for about 3 days. And during that time, I felt, here is this great man who inspires awe and continues to inspire awe down the generations. And yet, I just couldn't really understand, how could he have so much time just for me? But that's how Prabhupada was. And it was such good fortune for me, because that was really all due to the fact that Shamsundar, beckoned me in to be with Prabhupada. Such a good fortune. So, thinking about all of us and Prabhupada, this is all of our stories, this last 40 years. Only a few people, were fortunate enough to have Prabhupada's direct company. But it seems like, anyone who has contact with Prabhupada, their life is irrevocably changed. Of course, Prabhupada met many people, not everyone engaged with him. But if you engaged with Prabhupada, your life would be changed. My first encounter with Prabhupada was, in fact, as I mentioned, it was on television. When Prabhupada arrived here in 1969, and was immediately, he was picked up from the airport in John Lennon's personal Rolls Royce. Such a wonderful, so he commented to great outrage from the right-wing Christian lobby that we're more famous than Jesus. But it was probably true at that time. So anyway, 2 or 3 days after Prabhupada arrived, Mukunda and Gurudas, I'm guessing, had arranged for him to be on television. There was a program called Late Night Lineup on BBC Two. In the days when television was still kind of cool. BBC Two especially was cool because it was meant to be for the intellectual people. And it hadn't long been started. And I was still living at home just about. During the holidays I was at home. And I didn't really get along much with my father. He was a forbidding person, but we used to end the day watching Late Night Lineup. That was a kind of ritual. So one evening we were sitting side by side, Everyone else had gone to bed, it's late, and Late Night Lineup came on the screen. And Tony Bilbo, who was the presenter of the program, extremely hip guy, he said, so today we're going to, I'd like to invite you to the studio, and then he said a name, and an old Indian man came on, elderly Indian holy man. Which was quite a shock, because normally, you know, he had sort of, you know, writers, actors, the occasional politician, artists, and here was obviously a holy man. He was in a rather different league. As soon as he began to talk, it was clear. He was in a rather different league from Tony Bilbo. He was a young man, quite sure of himself, perched on his seat, and Prabhupada was sitting, the Indian holy man was sitting back, looking extremely relaxed. And Tony Bilbo asked him why he had come to England. And he answered that I came in order to teach how to love God, something like that. So Tony Bilbo said, is this the same God that we worship? The Christian God? As soon as he said that, I thought, yeah, right. Is this the same God? Because I always wanted to know more about God than my teachers could ever tell me. My teachers, who were all Catholic priests and monks and so on, they always said, well, you don't need to hear what other people say, because all you need to know is what the Catholics say. And then you can understand everything. But I was not quite convinced, because I could not believe in a God who was capable of punishing somebody with eternal hell. Simple as that. Yeah. This man, he looks like he really knows. He's speaking truth. So is this the same God? And then of course Prabhupada replied, yes, God has many names. And so at that point, you know, I sat right forward in my seat, I was glued to the screen. And then he asked another question. He said, so what is your method that you're teaching? And Prabhupada, it seemed that he said, well, you just sing the names of God. And of course Prabhupada spoke with a strong Indian accent. And I thought, no, I didn't catch that, because it sounded like he said you just sing the names of God, and that can't be, you know, that simple. So then Tony Bilbo said to him, would you like to demonstrate? And then Prabhupada's face changed. He had been relaxed but serious. And suddenly this huge smile filled his face. And he said, yes. So then he got up, and Tony Bilbo followed him to another part of the studio, where Shamsundar and Gurudas and Mukunda and Yamuna and Malati and Janaki must all have been sitting. They were sitting on the floor. And Prabhupada sat down in the middle of them. And I thought, well, I don't think I thought it at the time. I wasn't able to compute. I was just, you know, my mouth was open. But in retrospect, I thought, I never saw anyone sit on the studio floor before. You only ever saw people from here upwards. And the presenter, Tony Bilbo, he went with a microphone He probably went to a couple of doors, but I particularly remember he went to Shamsundar. I know it was Shamsundar because, you know, you had that shiny shaven head which you always had in those days. And your tilak went from here all the way to there. And I thought, and you know, you spoke in the relaxed sort of way that you do about how he's asked something about, you know, how did you meet Prabhupada, and you said one or two words, and I just thought, that guy is far out. I thought, I wish I could be like that, but I could never do that. That's the thought that went through my mind. So then, everyone settled down, and all the instruments were there. You know, there was the harmonium, which probably was Yamuna. There was the tambura, which I get was probably Mukunda. Or, anyway, somebody was playing the tambura. There was the mridanga. Shamsundar had the Esaraj, probably, maybe by that time.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada had the karatas, so, or maybe he had them in icon rather. Prabhupada started the chanting. And as soon as that sound sort of, it just emanated from the television, it arose from the television set and it filled the room. And that sound was so divine to my innocent ears. I just thought, what a beautiful sound this chanting is. And then as soon as when I heard that, I just thought, I did hear him right. It is that you just chant. It just seems so clear. So the whole, you know, the mantra was chanted and the response came, and then I was thinking, gosh, this is wonderful. But then the program just came to an end. And you know, the words began to scroll down the screen and it faded out. And that was, you know, I turned to my father and I said, wasn't that amazing? He didn't agree. Which was ever after the story, unfortunately. I once brought my father here to show him the, you know, my hand. I just wanted to show him this is what your son is up to, you know. And he stood outside. He wouldn't set foot in the room, in the temple room. He just said, "Oh, okay." But he had a brother. I had five brothers, and two of them are Jesuit priests. So after my father died, his brother Edward, Uncle Edward, he was a Jesuit missionary, and he came, you know, when he died, he came here, stayed in London for a couple of weeks, and he came here every morning, and he attended the Bhagavatam class, and he bowed down in front of Krishna. I thought when I first became a devotee, I thought, no, this is wonderful, because now, you know, all my life I've been surrounded by religious people, monks and nuns and priests and what have you, in the Catholic upbringing that I had. I thought, this is great, because now I've found a way of sharing their devotion with them, because I couldn't buy into their version of God. But now I've found a version I can buy into, so now we can all be brothers together and sisters together. That's what I thought. So a few weeks after, or no, a few days even after joining the temple, we used to do a lot of Harinam, which of course I know now is been resurrected. There's a lot of Harinam goes on. Well, we took it incredibly seriously, the Harinam. It was actually, it was a very conscious, I guess maybe we owe quite a lot to the tradition of Harinam in England. It was really set up, as I learned, by Prabhupada before you left America. You met with Prabhupada in Montreal, and he made a great emphasis on teaching his 6.5 disciples, or so, because there was 1-month-old Saraswati, one must never forget, teaching you how to chant nicely, because his idea was, world Sankirtan party that was going to travel and convert and introduce people to Krishna through chanting. And Mukunda, of course, is an expert musician, so Prabhupada always referred to him, as he did in that letter, as the music master. So that music and the approach to chanting was taken very seriously, because that's how Prabhupada wanted it to be musical, glorious. But for the sake of our mission, Prabhupada taught us to pay great attention to the quality of the presentation. And then I think also, from what I learned, we owe something to a major article which was headed, "We're all Hindus now." Did anyone see that or hear of that? It was written by some opinion former in America. The point being that America, like many of the countries in the Western world now, is multicultural. There's many religions side by side. And traditionally almost all religions have cultivated, this sort of we're right and others are wrong. Some people belong and some people don't. It's a feature of every religion, actually. It's a feature of Vaishnavism as well. If you look, you'll find divisiveness. But the enlightened devotees don't see like that. Because in Krishna consciousness, in our vision of the ultimate reality, is each of us are a separate, eternal individual, and we have a personal relationship with God. So armed with that insight to respect a person's difference, then we can all get along together. If my version of unity is that everyone's going to think like me, I'll never get it.
Yeah, I was going to add one more thing.
Yeah, I was going to add one more thing. You said another thing about if someone thinks like you, then it's not like that, because you said no to you. I picked up. Yeah, it says, what was it? Yeah, I heard Prabhupada the other day, I was watching, and he said something about, on the internet, he said, oh, if you think that everyone thinks like you, then you're a fool. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. Also, the word Hindu doesn't exist. It's Hindu, isn't it? Yeah, that's cool.
Yes, in retrospect, I see that Krishna taught me that lesson the very first time I encountered it. My father couldn't get it.
Yeah.
We've been hearing a lot about. We've been hearing from the devotees about the family atmosphere that was created here in London. Could you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I thought, no one else is like me. I don't belong in this world. But then when I met the devotees, I thought, that's where I belong. And I really felt I was just joining a family completely, absolutely. And it felt like that, the minute Yamuna said, come and help, actually I felt that straight away. There was a delightful family atmosphere in the temple. And out of recognition of the fact that, as you were saying yesterday, Shamsundar and Gurudas, you were saying, that atmosphere was developed in San Francisco. I made the first part of the book about San Francisco because that's where the mood was set. And part of that mood, which we lost for a long time, but I feel like it's returned now somewhat. I was at the Manor a few weeks ago. I was invited to give the morning class there, and so I arranged to stay overnight. I've learned that that's the best way for me to get into the mood. I just stay overnight there. So I started doing that lately. So I stayed overnight, and in the morning I was there for the morning program. And there were two things I particularly noticed that I don't remember from any time in the last 25 years. One was that, you know, when I used to live near the manor and I would go in for the morning program, and very often by the end of the japa period I used to be the only person in the temple room, because people had things to do, or they felt tired, or whatever it was. But I noticed that at the end of the japa period, the temple room was still full. That really impressed me. But the other thing I noticed, and I think the two are related, is that, you know, it used to be the practice. It wasn't the practice when I joined, but it became the practice that the women would have to go somewhere else to chant, and the men, you know, chanted in the temple room, the women went somewhere else. But now I notice in the manor, and I think it's the same here too, everyone stays together and chants. You know, the women stay one side, the men stay the other side. And I think that community spirit was for me hugely important. You know, when I was a young devotee, I needed that sense of family. And that was part of it, you know, that we all played a different role. And Yamuna was very much like a mother figure. That was important for me. And of course what kept the family together was that everyone was always talking about Prabhupada, constantly. So many stories. I think Gurudas, was it you that sort of wrote down a lot of those anecdotes about Prabhupada? Was that you? Yeah. We had, you know, pages and pages of stories of Prabhupada. In fact, later, some years later, when we got back to Vedanta Manor, I think it would have been in 1976, Prabhupada came and stayed for several weeks, and you were there. And Prabhupada wasn't well. He was mostly in his quarters. But and in previous visits he had used to go out on the lawn and sit down, and devotees would sit around him. But you were doing that. And people would sit and you would just tell stories of Prabhupada. Do you remember that? Yeah. It made a big impression at the time. It's that family spirit, and part of, you know, family spirit is affection for the father or the grandfather.
And I was recently reminded, I used to read the Krishna book in the Brahmacharini ashram as we had hot milk at night. So that was also one of the things. I would go there and read the Krishna book in the Brahmacharini ashram.
With hot milk?
Ranchor Prabhu, could you share with us perhaps a lesson or some instructions or insights you might have to how we might increase that family atmosphere within the community? Not that it's lacking, or not to say anything negative, but how it might be increased.
I don't know if I'm really the one to ask, but you're not forgetting each other. I remember when I was newly joined, after a year, Mukunda conspired to get me married. And I was really not up for it. But what convinced me was he said, and so Prabhupada gave me his blessings, and we went up to preach in Manchester. So I went up there, and I was away, you know, for about 9 months up in Manchester preaching. And I remember I came back down to the temple and all the faces had changed, even in that short time, so many new faces. And Prabhu Vishnu was in charge then. So I went up into the office and went to say hello to Prabhu Vishnu, and he said, "Oh, we all thought you blooped." And I was so shocked. I said, "Didn't you know? I'm preaching up in Manchester. You know, lots of devotees joined." So I just think that there is that sense of out of sight, out of mind. And we should, you know, there are so many devotees living in the world who might be out of sight, but they are devotees. And they're part of that family. They feel themselves very much to be part of the family, actually. And we need to help each other, really. You know, it's not the one or the other. We all need to help each other, because we're all really a little bit like I felt in Dublin. We're all kind of aliens as soon as you become a disciple of Prabhupada. On one level, of course, you enter into a much deeper relationship with the people and all the living beings on this planet. But on another level, you become something strange to most people.
I've got a question from somebody online. You've got about 150 people listening to you. Glenda Thornton is wanting to know, what's the most secret thing Prabhupada ever told you? Something, she's from South Africa, and she wants to know something maybe he whispered in your ear. She also wants to know that, but somebody from Peru, Ole, is saying that it was very secret, perhaps you're not going to tell us.
What was the name of the person in South Africa?
Brenda Thornton from South Africa.
Brenda, right. Well, Brenda, if we ever meet, I'll tell you.
And Alan Garcia has a question. He wonders, will Krishna consciousness last the whole Kali Yuga?
Oh. You know, I was just reminded of something. The last time George Harrison met Prabhupada, he said something like, "Well, soon, Prabhupada, everyone will be chanting Hare Krishna." And Prabhupada said, "That will never be." So, we have a glorious, you know, mission to occupy us for as many lifetimes as we care to spend. But I don't think that the world's ever going to become fully Christian, because that would be the end of the whole project, wouldn't it? Well, it's been, yeah, okay.
I was going to ask, because you mentioned there, actually I was going to say, you were reading from your from the book there, and then you kind of went off into other pastimes and everything. And I was going to say that that makes for a really good book as well, because I was really enjoying listening to that. But what I was going to ask was that when Prabhupada was asking you in Nairobi about the land that had been donated and the property that he wanted you to develop,
that was in Trinidad. The land was in Trinidad.
Okay. And how you were responding to that brief, if you will, or kind of, you know, design space or whatever. If there was any difference to that and the way you would respond in a professional context, you know, from your previous experience as an architect.
Well, the way I'm brought up is everything you're given, you take it with the utmost seriousness, because it's all ultimately from Krishna. So if I'm working for, but of course, Krishna's, you know,